Hey everybody, and welcome back to our scenario playthrough series. This is number 29, Future World. We've got a pretty big park to work with, and as you might expect, our video series is going to be long on this one. This is actually a four-parter, so we're beating Fun Fortress by one episode. It takes quite a bit to build out this whole park, and also to try and figure out kind of what the direction is for the overall look and feel of this thing. So we want to get 1,500 guests by the end of October, year 3. Park rating is at least 600. We've got two rides to start with, the suspended monorail here and this dive coaster that's not super realistic, so we're going to do some work on that one. Also, we have the elevation change on the monorail, which I'm not a fan of, so we'll go ahead and adjust all that. A couple interesting things that we are introduced with here is the larger buildings as kind of standalone scenic elements. We've seen land blocks used for buildings in earlier scenarios like Haunted Harbor, but this one's sort of the first time where we see them basically just used as sort of standalone scenic elements, and then also using pathways as scenery. So the pathway on top and then those checkerboard red and brown pathways to cover the entrance tunnel, I guess it would be. So we're going to lay into that a little bit. One of those things is adding some more buildings. I am going to get rid of the pathways as scenic on top of the buildings. We're going to try and activate some of those spaces and actually bring guests up to those areas. So that's something we'll start with here in a little bit. But we don't have a ton of rides to play with here initially, so we're going to use the swinging inverter ship to start. And I'm going to sandwich these between two buildings because I thought it would be kind of neat to see them kind of swinging up from between these spaces, sort of obscured a little bit, and then suddenly it swings out. So I thought that could be a cool visual, perhaps. So the challenge we run into with this scenario is basically, what do we do with the theme? Is this Mars? What is it? You know, I think our conversation on stream sort of tended towards this could be like a sort of desert type area that's, almost like a movie set maybe, or some kind of a thing that is grounded in some level of realism, as sort of tenuous as that argument may be. But I think it's a good one, and I also want to be able to think realistically about this and build this at least in a semi-realistic manner. It's going to take us a little bit to kind of figure out what the overall look and feel is going to be for this map, but over the next four parts here, we'll land on it, and I think I'm pretty happy with how it turned out, but certainly you guys shall be the judge, and I'm curious to hear what you think once we get through the whole thing. So you can see the first major change that I made was to remove the entrance station for the suspended monorail. Not that I didn't necessarily want that. You know, most park transport rides have a station at the entrance to either give you a tour of the park or distribute you within the park. So there's that kind of functionality aspect of it, and this one would have had 3 stations on the course. But what I wanted to do here was clean it out from this kind of main area here, because I know we're going to be adjusting the dive coaster eventually, and we've got some other stuff to do in here, and I wanted a space to make a plaza just because there was not really area for an entrance space, and spoiler, this plaza will be completely blown up here and redone in a way that looks much, much better eventually, I think. But I wanted to get that out of the way, so we removed that station. It also helped remove some of the up and down element on the monorail, which I never really like. So we'll go through and just keep it as sort of a inner park transit, I suppose, where we have a ease of movement from one side of the park to the other, I guess. So it's not really as much of a tour as it is a get from one side to the other without having to walk. But, I think that works fine. I did toy with putting a station back in the front eventually, but kind of ran out of space and time. But on to the first coaster here. So we have a Togo stand-up coaster, which, not too bad. I like building these. They're kind of fun, and there's not a ton of variety in most of the later ones, but there were a few that were at least sort of interesting. I mean, Dange, the original Togo stand-up, was fairly interesting. That one was converted from a sit-down and has the stand-up trains, but an interesting, unique layout. And then, of course, Fujin Raijin at Expo Land that unfortunately had the fairly infamous accident, but it has at least a more custom, interesting layout, so it sort of opens us up for the ability to do the same here. One of the things that I sort of find frustrating about these, especially in the RCT1 space, is that you don't have the helix pieces, and I generally advocate for not using the flat helix pieces and making a flat helix, because typically that's not really super realistic in coaster building. However, Togos and Japanese coasters in general are one of the few ride types where you can get away with that. And I was going to use that here, but I don't have it, unfortunately. So we are basically going to have to deal without it. I kind of wanted a final helix right here, perhaps, but couldn't do it. So we're going to do more of a elevation change on a turnaround type helix here. So we'll have that last climb there into a dip. So generally following typical Togo sort of things here, where we've got our loop, but it's not necessarily the first element off of the drop. Got the flat bit on top of the lift to get the whole train up on the flat, so you reduce strain on the lift hill, and a couple of these little just kind of dips and climbs and things like that. So we'll go with that. It's sort of unfortunate that Togo coasters were so kind of poor in the US. Like Shockwave King's Dominion was not very good, and Skyrider at Canada's Wonderland was okay. Never got to ride the one at Kings Island, and then of course Manhattan Express in Vegas is not great. Now it has the premier trains, I suppose, but Togos in Japan are actually great. They're a lot of fun. I rode a bunch of them when I was over there, and really they're all excellent. So it's sort of a shame, and I do really actually kind of like Togos. So I think that was a good way to start here. We're going to go with this sort of lime green color and the purple supports. I think that's a good combo there, the green and purple anyway. Kind of has a little bit of a, I guess, sort of an alien, classic alien feel to it maybe. But we're going to try and lean into that a little bit. Of course, we do have all the future scenery, so we'll go ahead and use that, or the Martian scenery, I guess it's called. I will throw in a scrambler right here to give ourselves a supporting attraction in this area. Really, the challenge here is contrast, and this is the same thing as when you get like a beach scenario or a mine scenario where you have the dirt all throughout the whole thing. In this instance, we have this Martian rock, sort of that red rocky texture. So it's really, really homogeneous. Like with grass, you can add in bits and patches of, say, grass and dirt, and you can really make it varied a little bit, and we don't really have that option here. We can have regular rock, like the gray rock, and we're going to bring that in here, as well as some dirt eventually to help that out, and some of the later tan, sandy color that we get with the open RCT version of these scenarios. But you don't have a whole lot of variety there. There's a whole bunch of folks that have now joined the Void that we will send some gift baskets to the family for, but their sacrifice is not in vain, because now you can walk up to the hot dog stand, so that's great. But anyway, I was saying on the kind of look and feel of the whole space, it ends up being very homogeneous through the whole thing, so we want to try and break that up, and part of that is just color contrast, so that bright green and the purple is going to stand out really nice against that red backdrop. We also have this kind of bright, or well, not necessarily bright, but a darker red pathway that is bold, but maybe blends in a little more than I might have liked. So eventually here, I don't think it might be this episode, but in the coming episode, we will see a change to that. The other one that we get from the start here, we get 3 scenery types actually right off the bat, which is sort of surprising. We have the mine scenery, we have the abstract scenery, and then we have the Martian scenery. So we're going to try and use that abstract stuff just a little bit, because why not? It's something at least a little bit different, sort of feels maybe kind of sculpturally interesting, alien looking, I guess. So you can color that in nice ways. We'll at least do something interesting there. I did kind of base a little bit of this park off of a Space World that was in Japan. It was a park that I got to go to in its final season before it closed, and I had an absolutely incredible experience. It's one of my favorite places. It is a shame that it's gone, but we'll have some little bits of influence here and there with all of that thing. Here's our next little building, and this is actually the second to last of the big buildings that we're going to add, but I wanted to basically connect up this bridge off of that first building to at least one other building, just to actually make it look like it was sort of on purpose and not sort of a one-off thing where it just happened once and then that was it. So in this instance, I thought, well, why not just sink an observation tower into the ground here, and then we can circle it with some pathway up top. So that would be kind of interesting, I think, maybe to board this in inside in darkness or whatever it may be, theming perhaps, and then you kind of rise up out of the building, and then you get to see the whole landscape around you. So that's at least how it was in my head, so, let's go with that, I guess. So now it's just a matter of trying to kind of connect all of this area. It gets a little bit messy here, especially because I want to modify this coaster, but at this point we can't really afford it. We need to spend more of our time building new attractions and other things rather than closing one of our big money makers and adjusting it. So that will come a little bit later, and for right now we just kind of have to work around it a little bit. I do swap out these fences, as you've seen, bringing in our spooky fence here instead of that whole kind of tall Martian fence. It's not really even a fence necessarily, it's just a bunch of these like vertical pylons. But the view, if you think about it from a guest standpoint, obviously you can see through the vertical elements, but I kind of wanted a larger, more open view, so that's why we've mixed in the spooky fence there, just to give ourselves a little bit more of an opportunity to look out. Obviously we're going to bring guests up on top of these big platforms, and you want some kind of a payoff, so let's let them see the rest of the park. Here's where we added in some water for the first time, so again, something that adds a bunch of contrast. That blue really works nicely up against the Martian rock. You can see here I'm trying to work around our existing coaster here, but we'll have to get back to that at some point. But we'll get there eventually. So one of the next things we're going to do while we're on our Japanese kick here is we're going to do another Togo. We're going to do a Heartline Twister. And these things are actually a lot of fun. I like Ultra Twisters in real life. There's only 4 of them left. Actually, 3 of them left now because Greenland closed theirs. I've ridden 2 of them. But they are really neat. They're pretty much all the same layout except for the one at Rasutsu Resort that has a dive loop, but without some hacks we can't really do that here in the game, so we're going to effectively recreate the standard layout. Now, of course, the game does not match the switch tracks properly, nor does it match a vertical lift and vertical drop as all of the real ones have. However, there was one Ultra Twister that made it into the US, and it was modified at one point after it moved from Great Adventure to Six Flags Astro World to have an inclined lift hill. So now we can add in this kind of long, awkward straight bit after the station and then transition with our weird, unrealistic transition elements here. But regardless, it is the closest that we can get to a standard layout of one of these things in our game here without messing around with hacks. So if you want to see one that actually looks pretty decent, in my opinion, with custom scenery and all that kind of thing, look on my channel for my review of Washuzan Park Rainbow Summit. That was one of mine on my last full-scale solo park, and I was pretty happy with how that one turned out initially. So I think that one turned out good. But of course, in our vanilla or more vanilla-ish play, I guess we should say, can't really do that. So there's our coaster opened up, so now we can at least kind of start putting this thing together. So what I am going to do here is try and build out a little plaza over here. Actually, not a little plaza, it's fairly sizable, I suppose. Or one of our 5x5 stacks. And then we'll go through and put in a connection over here. You can also see I'm dropping in a station for a second Ultra Twister because it feels like that's something we could do just to get some additional cash through the door. Of course, we can't charge quite as much now because we have the same ride twice. But at the same time, I think it will come out ahead for us overall. Wanted to do sort of a pink one on this one, and then we ended up going for more of a blue version over here. So we'll change these colors up a little bit later, but for now we'll stick with this. But of course, can't make the money until we connect it up, so we'll go ahead and do that. I've got it just one off of the ground, which was maybe a mistake. I maybe should have gone 2 so I could more easily get the pathway under there, but that's fine. So we went ahead and connected the whole thing across. And we'll go through and connect our station in here, make sort of a sub plaza for the queue itself. I wanted to put this in sort of a little bunker element here and kind of figure the queue may have some, I don't know, space related theming throughout. I'm not quite sure what it would be, but it's going to happen inside that building and we're going to use our imagination. So that's okay, I think. But we'll come back through and actually make that building look like something-ish a little bit later. But for now, it's just a matter of getting it in place. That's kind of our strategy here moving forward with a lot of these scenarios is we really got to focus on the goal initially, and then we can focus on making it look pretty good a little bit later. So with that in mind, we are going to plow ahead with getting our second one of these done. And we'll go through and get the money to do that, and it's going to take us a little bit to do that, unfortunately. I am going to use these kind of flowers here because they kind of looked sort of, I don't know, a little bit unique and Martian-y, and I have no idea what that means in terms of this context, but it just looks a little bit different than our standard flowers, so that's what we're going to go with for this instance. We're also going to use these geometric sculptures from the abstract pack, which I think look kind of neat, and we'll kind of use them throughout for that queue there. So now we can continue to build through this. It's going to just take us a minute to afford the whole thing, so it's sort of a wait and see situation at the moment, which is always sort of the frustrating part at the beginning of scenarios until you get enough money that you don't really have to think about it anymore. So it's just a matter of getting, say, the first 3 to 4 coasters or large money makers in. So until you get to that point, it's always a little bit of a struggle, and if the video ends up looking like it's bumping around a whole lot, that's because I have to chop out a whole bunch of sections here where we're sitting and waiting on stuff to be ready. But nearly done with this one, and then we can keep it going. One of the things we did struggle with, and you can see it a little bit here, is the path cleanliness. I don't like to hire very many staff at the beginning just because it's an expense that typically you don't really need. In this instance, we did kind of need it, and it's not going to be helped by a couple of redemptions for sick guests on our stream, but that's fine. We can deal with it. Thankfully, it doesn't make a huge impact in terms of attendance unless we drop our park rating a little bit too low. But here we go. Now we have a second one of these, which is pretty good, and that's all set. Can synchronize those two, which is always good, so I think that works out fairly well. Kind of fun trivia here is Togo actually did show off a dueling Ultratwister at one point at one of the IAPA conferences years and years ago, and it actually had turns in it. And because of the nature of the ride type, the turns have to be banked at 90 degrees, so it had this sort of interesting dive loop element and then a kind of swing around to the side turn, which is fairly interesting. You can find some images of the model out there on the internet if you search for it, but it's fairly interesting, so that would be kind of neat to be able to have the ability to do that. And certainly it's not exactly a high priority for extended pieces if we're going to talk about open RCT 2 possibilities, but would be one of those kind of future things that would just be fun to have. So we're going to go ahead and use all of these geometric sculptures throughout here. We only have the 2 types of them, but we'll just make the best of it and scatter them about across our flower beds and everything else, so that's fine. And now we can move on to the next thing, which is our first drop tower. So we'll have this as our shot tower, and eventually we'll unlock the Intamin gyro drop, so we'll go ahead and use that as our drop tower. This one I wanted to place here just because it worked really well in and around the Togo. Fit very nicely there. Put it up on top of a block too, so you have a little bit of a presence to the whole station and everything. We can put a little kind of elbow-shaped planter in here. Go ahead and adjust the launch speed to make that work. It would be kind of nice as a feature if there was a way to just auto-adjust to the speed that gets it to, like, one below the top tile or something. I guess that's maybe a little bit too automated perhaps, but it would be kind of nice to have that, just thinking aloud. But we'll go through here and put some theming to this whole thing. Again, we're going to use these flowers because we'll be consistent throughout. And we can put our queue up, get this thing charging for a decent amount of money. And there we go. So I think that's a good money maker right now. When we look through what we built so far, we've got effectively 3 coasters. We've got a drop tower. We've got 2 of the swinging inverter ships. We've got our scrambler as well, so I think that's pretty good for us to start, but let's keep on going with the coasters. We're going to do a junior coaster now, and what we're going to try and do is more of a fairground Zyklon type model, and this is a little bit challenging to do in the game. If you watched the Fix My Coaster Layout series, I think the last one, which was like over a year ago now, which is not good. We'll get back to that series eventually, but the last one where we did a Schwarzkopf Wildcat, you can see sort of the challenges of doing these because we just don't have diagonals that fit in the grid to make this work well. So what we've got to do instead is try and figure out ways to kind of cross over, make the clearances work, and then stack the whole thing correctly besides that. So what I'm doing here, we have an initial lift hill, diagonal drop, turn around with a little dive into it, and then we get into our stacked helixes underneath of those turnarounds. And that's sort of the goal, is to just make the whole thing stacked. That's really what sets these apart as sort of transportable type fairground rides. So you can see on this side with the smaller helix, I don't have the space to do it because we get the lift in the way. So we'll go ahead and nest it instead. So kind of your first priority, if you can, is to stack it. Your second priority, if you can't, is to nest it. So that's what we're going to do here. You can see here again, I'm trying to do a little bit of stacking. We're running out of height pretty fast, so this one's actually going to end up being fairly custom and go down a little bit further into the ground, so we're going to excavate a little bit. But part of this is trying to figure out exactly how this layout is going to sit here and how long we make the thing. I mean, we could have dropped right here into the brakes and turned it around the outside of the lift hill and helix there and connected it in and be done, but I didn't think it felt long enough, so I wanted to do one more wrap effectively. So go through here, go underneath this helix, go back to the front, and then turn around one more time and get it back. Challenge for us is just how do you make that work? So here's our run up to the station, I guess, and in some of these instances where you're having a little bit of block trying to figure out how it fits in, it's just a matter of you have to build the things that you know are going to have to go in eventually. So that final return to the station there. And then here I'm using a separate coaster type just to give us some testing to see what fits and what doesn't. I'm also turning on zero clearances here for just a minute to try and see how this could theoretically fit without me having to spend a bunch of money sinking down landscape and things like that. So this is more of a test bed than anything else, and part of this is also needing to pay attention to clearances for the ride itself, because I don't want to accidentally use the zero clearances on and then find out later I can't actually build it because I did the clearances too tight for the ride itself. So trying to just figure out how this is going to sort itself out. And you can see a couple of different things here that I'm playing with, and part of that is these S-bends and other things. I'd rather not do flat unbanked corners, even if it is the larger pieces here, especially when it's down low and fast. You know, if you raise it up higher when the ride is going a little bit slower, I think it's more easily acceptable to do unbanked corners, but in this instance don't really have that, so trying to avoid that to an extent. So here we are going back to that helix that I had initially, and in some instances it really just works out that the original plan that you had is probably the best one. So sometimes that's just how it goes, and we'll stick with this. So now it's a matter of trying to get it back to our end point here. So in this instance, I'm just building backwards. We need a full brake run in there because we're going to have a couple of trains on this whole thing. We're going to do probably 3, although I think we end up with 4 trains, which is fine. We've got enough blocks for it. Can certainly make that happen. So it's just a matter of trying to get enough brake run space for the whole thing. So here you can see how it is sunk fairly low down into the ground, which is not really my favorite, especially for this type of ride, which is really meant to be a sort of transportable thing that would be set up on top of a tarmac area, I guess, in a parking lot as a fairground coaster. But in this instance we don't have that option, and we're going to use a little bit more of our vertical height to get more of a layout. So I think in the end it turned out kind of sort of okay. We use these rocket cars, which are super low capacity for the size of the car. You know, we could certainly get a higher capacity if we use just the standard Ladybird trains that we've got for the ride, but I think in this instance it fits our theme, and we have enough trains where I'm not too worried about the whole thing. So I wanted to test this out, make sure it works very well before we go back through and do a little bit of repositioning too, and then also make it work from a clearances standpoint, lowering the ground to where it actually needs to be. So you can see here we're getting this prepped a little bit. What I want to do is move this thing into the corner, just because it is not we're not going to use anything in that corner, so we might as well give ourselves the most space we have to work with here and stick it as far to the corner as we can do. So that's what we'll put here, and then we'll go through and put our entrance and our exit, and then we can kind of create a little bit of a plaza here. So we're starting to get enough rides in place that we can start actually making sensible pathway layouts as well. So this is going to be sort of the first one of those here where we can make a loop, because you'll notice so far there are 0 loops in this park. It's just a bunch of dead ends so far. It's three separate dead ends and branches at the moment, but this will be the first one of the loops, and then part of this whole series of building out this whole park is going to eventually try and make a sensible path layout. So here we are, plaza, of course. Get this thing opened up and ready to go. I do like this sort of lighter purple look to the whole thing. This is one of the extended colors too, so it's not an original game color, but I do kind of like the look of it. That works fairly well. So that's a decent coaster to start. We're cruising along here. 4 coasters is fairly good for us to begin with, and we're not going to add too much more in that regard. There's 2 more coasters, I think, in the scenario, but those are going to come in future episodes. For right now, I'm going to go ahead and use some of these geometric shapes again, some of these flowers, again, try and be consistent across the board, tie in some different elements to it. We don't necessarily have separate themed areas. It's all sort of Martian space themed in general, but we have various little differences here and there. So now we have our loop of path, and let's fill in the middle of that loop of path with a car ride. So seems like maybe we have this space exploration type ride. We can use some of the big elements of the Martian scenery, which are kind of neat. A little bit repetitive, unfortunately, once you only have a couple of different ones to deal with, but we'll make it work. And in some of these cases, it might be sinking it into the ground a little bit, or placing them in clusters, or doing just something different with it, just to give it some variety there, so we don't end up having the same thing over and over, like this big sort of armillary deal with the planets and everything. I don't want to use too many of those because it's going to look really, really repetitive, just because it's kind of iconic, you know, whereas the other little towers there, like those little stacked ball things or the little robot creature, whatever it is, those I feel like you can place more liberally because it just kind of feels maybe more generic, perhaps. So I think it works a little less noticeably than some of the more iconic pieces. So we're going to try and use sparingly the other pieces there, or obscure it in a way that it's slightly different. So I'm building up a little bit of scenery ourselves here. One of the things that you had to start out with on this map with land modification is a lot of these sort of crater things, or just fairly simple land modification. So makes sense if they're going for this kind of Mars theme, but we're going to roughen it up a little bit, make some more interesting things. So it gives us some tunnels to work with and some other elevation change. So that's going to help us out, I think, in the end. So here we go. We can connect this whole thing together, and we have ourselves a car ride. I think the trucks are going to make the most sense here as we get our entrance and exit put in, just because it feels like it's a sort of expedition or exploration or something. So that works fairly well. I do like that we have some variety in terms of ride vehicles. It's one of the few rides that we have such a variety for. So now we can really start to get into this, making the rock and everything look a little bit different. So we're going to use the gray rock here. Again, really nice contrast. That gray to the red works fairly well, I think, and also with the various scenery elements. And I am going to start to bring in some greenery. So this is kind of back and forth that I went through trying to figure out what makes sense and what doesn't. So what I ended up with are kind of rules of engagement for scenery here is our greenery makes sense in instances where we can put brown or dirt into our landscape a little bit, so transition out of the red into the gray and maybe into the brown as well. And then on top of the brown we can put some of our landscaping, so it keeps it sparse and it keeps it kind of called out a little bit separately. So we're going to keep with these dark green bushes. We're also going to use cacti, because if we do call this out as, like, say, the Utah desert or Nevada or Arizona or wherever, I think it works well for that instance to have a couple of cacti, and we'll look into some other options here a little bit later too for greenery. Our pathways are a little bit of a mess here because somebody redeemed the Make Guests Sick redemption here on Twitch. If you want to join us for that and do that, twitch.tv/Amusement Academy for all of our live streams. But getting past that, which was a little bit of a pain, you can see our Our park rating kind of tanked during that instance, but that's alright. We can recover from it fairly easily, and it's not a big hindrance at the moment. But now we can go through here and add in these little, I don't even know what they are, I guess sort of like Van de Graaff generators perhaps, but they always remind me of the little door stopper things that you can, whap on the side, and then, I don't know, maybe that's just me, I don't know. Anyway, we have a absolute mess of a path here, so we're going to hire some extra handyman, and we'll keep them around this time. Usually for these instances, I will hire a bunch of handymen and then fire them again, but in this instance, we just had a hard time keeping up with the whole thing. So last ride for this episode today is going to be a top spin, and I thought maybe we anchor the plaza over here with one more ride, so this will build out this whole section fairly nicely. 2 different coasters, 2 different flat rides, a tracked ride, and then there's also the drop tower on the other side, so I think it works fairly well. We'll kind of make a nice little meandering pathway here that's cautious not to knock out too many of the supports on the Togo. But then we can go through here, raise this thing up again. I always feel like top spins are very nice for having them raised up for a viewing platform, and then also lets us do some theming around it. So we'll bring in our queue theming here, doing a little bit of mirroring what we did at the car ride, so that's not just a one-off. We can have more of these kind of rocky escarpments as they were, and we'll go through and build this, make our queue fairly interesting, make our exit fairly interesting even as well. A little bits of kind of pass through these faux rocks, perhaps. And then we can also go through here and put in some water, as many top spins are wont to do. We'll also, because we have water at the same level as the pathway around, we'll use the spooky fence, because that's one of the only ones with a solid bottom to the fence. So it looks fairly okay, just in general. And then we can come through here and use our newfound rules for landscaping and do some cacti and do some little plants and things like that, just to give it a little bit of greenery, to give it a little bit of transition. So I think you can probably agree as we go through this, it's starting to look a little better as we go and expand out with those elements. So one of the last things I thought I would do here is throw in some of these abstract features, which is what we're going to do, a couple of the different shapes and a couple of different colors, and stick with it like that. So something, maybe not the right thing, but I think it looks all right. But that's it for today, so thank you very much for watching. Like I said, there's 3 more episodes next, so come on back for the next ones. Thanks very much for watching. Bye now.